Good day, everybody. I thank you for joining us today, and I'm excited to present to you my presentation. Can everyone see the screen? All righty. Okay. So my presentation is entitled An Intro to Backyard Farming. So, as you all know already, my name is Germaine Turnquest. That is me on the left. On the right is my partner, Carleen Miller. We are co-owners of Grow Life Supplies. You can visit our website via the link at the bottom of the screen. So, backyard farming. Well, I think as we all know right now, it's very important for us to start growing our own food, especially due to the ongoing pandemic of COVID-19. Growing our own food has never been more important than it is right now. So let's get to it. So when it comes to gardening, the first thing you need to consider is your soil. But there are different soil types, and you need to know the difference and understand the difference between each type. So on the screen now, what you're seeing is topsoil, garden soil, and potting mix. This is what we're going to focus on starting out. So topsoil. So when you look at topsoil, when you go into the garden store or whether you buy it from a local supplier, what you want to consider are the following. The term topsoil refers to the top layer of soil on the surface of the earth. So basically, picture when a house is being built and there's a bunch of bushes and trees there. The house hasn't been built yet, so it has to be cleared down. Once all the bushes cleared down, the trees removed, that layer of soil that remains behind, that is topsoil. This topsoil is usually used for large-scale landscaping projects. And out of the three soil mediums that we just took a look at on the last screen, topsoil is the cheapest. Topsoil can greatly vary in quality depending on where it was sourced. And so to elaborate on that, depending on where it came from in the world, the soil may have been acidic. It may have a lot of silt inside of it as well. So when using topsoil in your garden, you want to be careful, and in that case, it's usually best to use it from a branded option when you go into the garden store and you buy the bags. Alrighty. Now the thing with topsoil to consider as well, because of where it's sourced from, it's usually loaded with weed seeds. So imagine now you put your garden together, everything's looking good, and then within a week, you look back and it's loaded with weeds that you now have to go and pull out. So that's definitely something to consider when using topsoil. It may also require a lot of sifting. Now usually when you get it in bags, it's pre-sifted and you don't have to worry about this. If you purchase it from a local supplier, you do want to ask whether or not it's sifted. Because if it's not, it can be filled with things that were in the bush where it came from. So these could be things like a lot of rocks, glass, plastics, even debris, different types of debris. You might even find a little piece of shoe in there and all. So you definitely want to keep this in mind when seeking out topsoil. Next up is garden soil. Now, garden soil is usually made up of a blend of soil and garden inputs. Now, what am I calling garden inputs? So if you look at the picture here, you see all of the nice looking soil and stuff, but you can also see bits of what looks like wood chips and stuff like that. So And there's also other things in there, things such as azomite rock dust, right? So what is that? We'll get to that later. That's an amendment. So usually it's made up of different organic inputs, soil, as well as soil amendments. It typically includes fertilizer. So the garden companies will put fertilizer in there in order, to help your plants along. So let's say you go to Modernistic right now and you purchase a bag of Jolly Gardener garden soil. You'll see on the bag where it says it has a 4-month supply feed supply for your crops. That's because of the added fertilizers that are included in the soil in that bag. Garden soils can be all-purpose or blended to suit specific types of plants. So by all-purpose, it's exactly what it says. Basically, what's being marketed to you on the bag is that it can be used to grow whatever you like. Other bags may say perfect for vegetable garden or perfect for starting citrus crops such as oranges and limes and stuff like that. So when you're seeking out garden soil, you definitely want to take a look at the bag, see what it says, and make sure it suits exactly what you want to do. Garden soil typically has good water retention. So when you water that in, it'll hold the water. It has a water holding capacity that is pretty good, and your plants will have a good supply access to water whenever you water them. You don't want to use garden soil in your container pots, and we'll get to that in a minute. On this screen here, what you're looking at is potting mix. Now, why do you want to use potting mix? Potting mix, whenever you're doing container gardening in pots or buckets, whatever you may have, it's a container, you definitely want it to have good drainage, right? More on that. A quality potting mix will usually be soilless. What do I mean by this? Exactly what it says. It won't actually contain soil. So what will it have? It'll be made up of a combination of peat, coconut coir, bark, vermiculite, and perlite. All of these are things that are put together and blended together to make up a good potting mix. And what these allow for is good drainage within your potting mix. You don't want the potting mix to hold so much water, because in a container, what can happen is it can actually end up drowning your plants. You can also end up developing root diseases, such as something called Fusarium root rot. So also always look for a good potting mix and always utilize potting mix when potting in containers. If you don't have access to potting mix and you have to use some garden soil in there, what you should do is add perlite. And just to give you an example of perlite is, if you look on your screen at the picture, those little white pebbles inside the potting mix, those are perlite. And what perlite allows is for good aeration in the soil. It allows oxygen to get to the root zone of your plants. Also, it allows for the water to be able to be drained out of your potting containers well. Potting mix is also designed to stay fluffy and not compact. And this is another reason you don't want to put topsoil or garden soil inside your garden pots and containers, because what will happen over time, soil naturally compacts, compresses down, and this can lead to the depletion of oxygen access for your plant's root zones. No air will be able to get to the roots, and you will have suffocated and dying plants. And even if the plants grow, they probably won't reach their optimal capacity simply because their roots are not able to develop. Alrighty. And as it states at the bottom, as I elaborated on, potting mix is the best choice for container gardening. Just add fertilizer. Compost, already. So this is the next topic we'll be talking about. So what is compost? Compost is described as, just a second here, get this off my screen. 1 second. Having a few issues with my laptop here. Alrighty. Compost is described as decomposed organic material derived from the process of composting. So exactly what you see in the picture there. What you're looking at is straw, garden waste, kitchen waste, all put together in a pile that will then be turned routinely over time until it breaks down to what you see to the right of the screen, compost. Compost is an essential component of every garden. It pretty much acts as the long-term feed and the main feed for your plants. Now, you can go to the garden store and you can purchase a bag of compost, right? But it's more economical if you can do it yourself. So what we're going to be looking at here now on this screen is exactly how to go about doing that. So making your own compost, it's important to understand the ratio in which you should add the inputs to your compost. Yes, you can add garden scraps, but this is just to give you a baseline idea and a rule of thumb on exactly how to do this. So the compost should be comprised of 25% nitrogen and 75% carbon. And the reason the carbon content is so much higher is because it takes numerous carbon molecules to break down one nitrogen molecule. So let's say you were to put a bunch of carbon in your compost, right? And then you add a bit of nitrogen and you add too much nitrogen. What can end up happening is your compost, instead of rotting down gracefully and going through the process properly, what can happen is you can end up with a lot of foul smell. And that's one way, that's one indicator that you're composting incorrectly. If your compost is wet to the touch, you're doing it wrong. If your compost is too dry, you're doing it wrong. If your compost smells, you're doing it wrong. You should be able to pick up your compost. It shouldn't have a foul smell to it, and it should feel damp, but not enough to the point where if you were to squeeze it, you actually get droplets of liquid coming from it. So now, what acts as the nitrogen source and carbon source for your compost? You can use green leaves, basically greenery. You can use green leaves, grass clippings, and weeds that you pull out of your garden. Throw that into your compost bin. You can use brown leaves to act as your carbon. And when you do this, just follow that same rule of thumb there. 25% nitrogen, 75% carbon. And yes, of course, you can add your kitchen scraps to that too. Now, in adding your kitchen scraps, you want to keep in consideration not to add, or at least not to add too much of certain things. An example of this is citrus. So you find an old rotted orange or lime in the back of your fridge, you should slice it up and then throw it in your compost, but keep in mind not to add too much of these. It's fine to throw 1 or 2 in there, but you don't want a large amount simply because you'll end up making your compost acidic. Now, usually when you think of making compost, you have a compost pile, right? And so you have a pile there or a bin that you throw all of your leaves and kitchen scraps into, and then you have to go there with a pitchfork and turn it at least once a week. And this is fine, but it can be easier. So on the screen now, these are compost tumblers, and these are excellent tools to have for your garden. They greatly reduce labor. All you have to do is simply turn the barrel. And you can make it yourself. So in the top picture on the right, that is a self-made compost tumbler using a 50-gallon barrel. Same barrel that sits in front of your yard probably with that you dump garbage into. At the bottom is an example of a compost tumbler that you can purchase off a website such as Amazon or wherever you can find it online. You may even be able to find some down here. I think I saw one in Kelly's. So run and grab it before all is gone. But yeah, this will definitely make your composting much easier for you at home. It's just spinning the barrel. And a lot of them actually have a hand crank at the side that you can turn to make turning the barrel easier, because as the compost breaks down, it will get a bit heavier. Now, we've discussed soil, we've discussed compost. Now we're going to talk about NPK. So what is NPK? When you go into a garden store to purchase fertilizer or even soil or compost, there are 3 numbers on the bag. What do these numbers mean? Those are the NPK ratio ratings for that product. So NPK refers to the number ratios found on fertilizer products. These numbers represent the percentage of macronutrients within the product. So what are macronutrients? Macronutrients are the main sources of nutrition necessary for plant growth, proper plant growth. So aside from macronutrients, you also have micronutrients and trace minerals. But for the sake of this presentation, we're going to focus on the macronutrients, because without these, your plants won't grow properly. So NPK, the N stands for nitrogen, the P for phosphorus, and the other P for potassium. Well, the K, potassium. It's the K is the periodic table symbol for potassium. Now, if you look at the picture to the right, you'll see on this bag of fertilizer, in this example, the NPK is 18, 24, and 6. So what that is telling you there is that there is 18% nitrogen content within that bag, 24% phosphorus, and 6% potassium. So understanding the role that these macronutrients play within your fertilizers for your garden, or whatever product you purchase, whether it be soil, fertilizer, compost, understanding the role they play is very important. So in the picture at the bottom, you'll see there's a tomato plant. So what the nitrogen is doing, it helps with the coloration of the plant and the foliage. It helps the plant to produce nice leaves, right? Nice, good-looking leaves. So an indicator that your crops may not have enough nitrogen in the soil is if you see the leaves looking yellow. If your leaves are yellowing, you might want to look into adding nitrogen to your soil. Phosphorus. This helps the plant along with producing the fruits and the flowers. The plant first needs to produce flowers to produce fruits. But if there's not enough phosphorus in the soil for the plant to uptake through the roots, what can happen is you'll get the flowers on your plant and then they just drop off. They die off, drop off. You get no tomatoes or no cucumbers or whatever it is you're trying to grow in terms of fruiting crops. Potassium. You need potassium in your soil to help your plant to develop strong roots in order to uptake the other nutrients. So you see how vital understanding NPK is for your plants, for your garden. It's very important. So let's move on. And we'll be discussing NPK a bit further as well. Now on the screen, we'll be discussing organic versus synthetic fertilizers. What's the difference? Why would you choose one over the other? Synthetic fertilizers. Well, these are fertilizers that are derived from chemical bases and processes within labs, right? They can be liquid, or they can be powders, or they can be granules, such as what you see in the top picture to the right. Pros of synthetic fertilizers: they can immediately feed your plants, right? And the nutrient release from synthetic fertilizers are provided via water. So when you purchase a liquid synthetic fertilizer, you don't pour this directly onto your plant. You will kill it. You mix it inside some water, and then you add that to the soil in your garden. Next. All right, so another benefit of it is your plants will grow rapidly, simply because the nutrients are immediately available to your plants, right? And that's pretty much where the pros end. Cons on why, in my opinion, you shouldn't use synthetic fertilizers. They're usually derived from the petroleum industry. Does it sound like something that you would want to put in your body, right? It's like margarine, right? Growing up, you used to eat a lot of margarine. You use it to fry stuff down, greasy pan. And then, you learn a bit later on, hopefully, that it's not really something good for your body. Same thing applies to synthetic fertilizers, in my opinion. They generally contain no micronutrients. I'll expand on that later. Nutrient release is quick and short-lived, so frequent application is needed. So you go and get a bottle or some of the powdered synthetic fertilizers, and you apply that to your garden. It immediately feeds your plants. Things start to look good right away, but you have to add more of it very soon, because pretty much as soon as you apply it, it doesn't last very long. So even though in some cases synthetic fertilizer may be cheaper than an organic one, is it really? Because you have to purchase more of it. It greatly increases, I need to get this off my screen. 1 second. It greatly increases the chance of over-fertilization. So let's say you're new to gardening, never done it before. You go and get a bottle that promises you all this, magical stuff, excellent and vigorous plant growth. And you may not have paid attention to the directions on the bottle, or it could just be an error. You add too much of it to your garden. So instead of getting that nice, beautiful plant growth, what can happen is you end up with a lot of burnt up plants. The next con to synthetic fertilizers is it does absolutely nothing to improve the structure of your soil. So other than feeding your plants, it does nothing for your garden. Now to you, that may be enough. If it is, go right ahead. Organic fertilizers. So in the picture to the right, this is what a typical organic fertilizer shelf in a garden store would look like. All of these pretty good stuff to include in your garden. So the pros of organic fertilizers, as you can see, they already greatly outnumber those of synthetics. They're derived from byproducts of living organisms. So these can be examples of this. These can be byproducts from different industries. It can be the poultry industry. It can be, so for example, there, you have things such as feather meal. So when they defeather the chickens, what they do is they take those feathers and they process them and they grind them down pretty much into a powder, and they create something called feather meal. And that is used as a natural and organic source of nitrogen for your garden. Another example of this would be bone meal, where they powderize the bones of animals that have been slaughtered. Sounds gross, but this is nature. Micronutrients are typically present within organic fertilizers. So remember with synthetics, they typically don't. Some of them can, but the majority of them, 90% of them, include no micronutrients. Why are micronutrients important? Micronutrients are important because these help to improve your plants. They are literally vital to your plant's health. And also organic fertilizers, when applied properly, require much fewer applications. You can literally apply some organic fertilizer to your garden and don't have to do it until the next time you grow another set of crops. So think about that. Even though a bag of organic fertilizer may cost a bit more, in the long run, it's actually cheaper. Nutrient levels are generally lower than those of synthetics. Yes, and that is because, well, let me give you an example. When you go and buy a synthetic fertilizer, you'll see, remember we talked about NPK, the 3 digits on the bags, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. What you'll see there is, you'll see very high numbers. So say something like 20, 20, 20, or 17, 18, 17. The thing about that is nature does not provide nutrients and stuff like that in those concentrations. It's not natural. So if you can kind of zoom in on the picture here, let me see if I can zoom it in for you guys. Okay, that's not happening. Alrighty. So, but if you can look closely on that bag there that says blood meal, the NPK ratio on there says 10, no, yeah, on blood meal it says 1300, and the other one says 1031 on the bag that says bat guano. That is a more accurate display of what nature would provide for you in terms of an NPK ratio when using organic fertilizers. Sometimes they can even be significantly lower than that. Sometimes it'll be 323 or 404, something like that. So keep an eye out for that when you go into the garden stores. If you see the number significantly high straight across the board, it's probably not organic. Alrighty. Organic matter content improves soil structure and water retention. Definitely. So when you add organic fertilizers to your garden, you improve the soil's ability to hold. So when you put that there, basically what I'm saying is the water won't run out as fast. It helps to build the soil. So yet another reason to go organic. It provides a food source for microorganisms within the soil, which naturally leads to further nutrient availability. Definitely so. So in your soil are lots and lots of microscopic bioorganisms that thrive on the different matter and substances within the soil. And you definitely want those there because these help to keep your soil healthy. This is what makes your soil basically alive. Now, so what are some of the cons to organic fertilizers? Well, nutrient release, the rate of nutrient release to your soil is relatively slow. So how can you get past that? Remember when we talked about synthetic fertilizers? Synthetic fertilizers, they immediately feed your plants. So how can you have the nutrients from organic fertilizers supplied immediately to your plants when you plant them? Well, before you plant, add your organic fertilizers ahead of time. So if you know second week in August, you're going to be planting at least a week to 2 weeks before, 2 weeks, you should have already added your fertilizer to your beds. Now, there's nothing wrong with adding the organic fertilizer to your plants once the plant's already planted, but it's always best to get a jump start. Now, if you want a faster release of nutrients to your crops via organic fertilizers, you can use liquid fertilizers. So if you look on that shelf in the picture, you see multiple bags, and those would be the dry organic fertilizers. But if you look at the shelf before the bottom shelf, you see a bunch of bottles. Those are the liquid ones. Just like the synthetics, you would mix them in water and then apply them to your garden. Just follow the instructions on the bottle. And also with organic fertilizers, there's much less risk of burning your plants than with synthetics. So this is just an example, just a picture to help describe to you, give you a better picture of exactly what happens when you add organic fertilizers to your garden versus chemical fertilizers. All the chemical fertilizers will do is feed your plants, and that's where it ends. Organic fertilizers will feed your plants, build your soil, increase the microbiology in the soil. And so by using organic fertilizers, what you're doing is guaranteeing that you will always have a strong, healthy garden. And a strong, healthy garden, strong, healthy plants fights against pests better. It's more resilient. So let's talk about all-purpose fertilizers and amendments. So an all-purpose fertilizer is exactly what it says. It's exactly what it says. In the picture to the right, you have an organic option. The picture to the right, the Miracle Grow would be an example of a synthetic option. An all-purpose fertilizer, like I said, that's exactly what it says. You can plant whatever you want in it. That's pretty much what they're marketing to you. A soil amendment, on the other hand, addresses specific nutritional needs. So let's say you plant a bed of lettuce or a bed of kale. Those are heavy nitrogen feeders. So remember when we talked about blood meal a second ago? And remember the NPK ratios? Blood meal in the product in this picture here has an NPK ratio of 12:0:0. So there's 12% nitrogen. Alrighty, all-purpose fertilizers. They cover a wide range of nutrition for plants. Depending on the crop, an all-purpose fertilizer may not adequately meet your crop's specific needs. They are going back to the example I gave just now. And that's where your amendments come in. So I do suggest after this presentation, look up soil amendments and different ones. Another example in this on the screen right now is bone meal. The second ratio, number 12, represents that it will provide 12% phosphorus to your garden. So you understand? It's basically, the amendments provide a single source of nutrition for the garden. So another example, let's use lettuce again. You see your lettuce start looking yellow, you probably should add some blood meal or feather meal. Now, let's talk on synthetic versus bio pesticides. Very important. So synthetic pesticides versus biological pesticides. Well, you can say organic or natural. There are some differences, but the synthetic versus biological, this is the main differentiator. So synthetic pesticides, application effect, and we talked about this, the same thing with fertilizers. The effect is immediate. With a synthetic pesticide, you spray it on your crops, it immediately destroys and kills whatever the pest is. With biological or organic pesticides, the effect is delayed. And there's a reason for this. And it also comes down to how you apply the pesticide. I'll get to that in a minute. Negative effect on beneficial organisms. And we talked about all that good stuff in your soil, all of the microbiology that lives in the soil, that does your garden well. Synthetic pesticides tends to kill them off, therefore resulting in a weaker garden. So you got rid of the pest, but you also weaken your garden overall. Biological pesticides, the negative effects, low to none. And the reason low is there is simply because you can overfeed your garden with, it's just like your body, you know, or anything in life. Too much of one thing is no good. So always pay attention to the instructions on the products. Nature of control. Now, When you're using a synthetic pesticide, you're thinking along the lines of ridding a problem that already exists, right? So you go outside and you take a look at your Swiss chard or your bok choy or your cabbage, and you see a bunch of bugs on the leaves. So now you panic and you're like, how can I get rid of these? And so you go and you buy a bottle of synthetic pesticide, spray it on there, everything dies immediately. With biopesticides, the same can be achieved, but when you're using organic pesticides, biological pesticides, natural, you're thinking more prevention from the get-go. So you plant your crops and you apply the pesticides so that they're never affected by pests, or at least not heavily affected by pests from the get-go. Synthetic pesticides are, in terms of the way they target, right? They mainly target a broad spectrum of pests. Now, this can work well. So basically, any pest, unfortunately, usually beneficial organisms will die as well. With biological pesticides, they're mostly host specific. So an example of this, you may see some aphids on your plants, and you can go out and purchase horticultural oil or neem oil, and you mix that, and that is designed specifically to attack those as well as some other pests. But it probably won't cover everything in terms of pests that you'll find in your garden. So these are some examples of organic pesticides. Before this, let me give you an example of a synthetic. To the left is Roundup. Roundup is an example of a synthetic pesticide, and the thing about Roundup is I definitely Roundup because it has been found to have some very negative effects. If you study Roundup, you'll see there's actually a lot of lawsuits going around that brand, that are centered around that brand. Alrighty, organic pesticide examples. So you have things like neem cake. You also have horticultural oil. Neem cake can be found locally here, right here in the Bahamas from Abaco. And it's provided by Abaco Neem. So give them a shout, get yourself some neem cake. Now, in terms of dealing with things such as slugs and snails, you have diatomaceous earth, and you also have sluggo. You apply this around your garden, and as these things crawl through it, what it does is it completely dries up all the mucus, all of the sticky mucus layer around their body, causes them to get cuts and abrasions, and then they die off. A few gardening options. Alrighty, so the picture to the right, this is Miss Carleen Miller, my partner, and this is her working in our in-ground beds at our farm, harvesting some kale. So the options we'll be talking about is in-ground, container, and raised beds. So these are examples of in-ground gardening. So with our option here, what we do personally is we use ground cover and we enclose the beds in it to give it a more aesthetic look, as well as it's very easy to maintain. In-ground beds are usually very cheap. Now the con to it is they're very labor intensive. So to prepare the ground, you have to whip out the good old pickaxe. And also they are ground level, so it's not very easy on your back. Container gardening. So this refers to your plant pots, buckets, anything you may have. To the right, those are fabric pots. So container gardening is great for beginners. You should always use a good potting mix. Remember, we talked about it before. You want to do this because it provides good drainage within the containers. And then you have modularity. All that means is you can literally pick them up, move them around, stuff like that. And if you get some good sized containers and you fill them to the height that they're supposed to be filled, they're elevated. Raised beds. So these are some examples of raised beds that we did for some of our clients. Well, they're physically easier to maintain simply because they're above the ground, good soil depth for proper root development. And we'll get to that a bit later on in the presentation. And they're very easy on your back. And I definitely do recommend lasagna layering when doing your raised beds. And we'll get to that in a minute. So how to build a lasagna bed. This is just a diagram. You don't have to use these exact inputs, but basically it's like lasagna. There's just different layers of organic material that you apply to the bed. And what these will do is break down over time, and these will increase the microbiological activity and fertilization of your soil in your raised beds. Big healthy crops. I also advocate that if you can, and utilize an automated drip irrigation system. It greatly reduces your labor, and there's no need to remember to grab the hose in the morning and in the evening. And it also, we live in a very hot climate. It assists your crops. A lot of people don't grow anything at all during the summer simply because it's too hot. Well, at our farm, we're growing quite a few things right now, and that's a major part of that is thanks to our automated drip irrigation system. The picture to the right is an example of a job that we did for a client where we installed a very large drip irrigation system for his backyard farm. To the left are some raised beds that we built that were in the previous picture. And those lines on top of the beds are drip irrigation lines. Now, recommendations when you're getting your seeds and your seedlings for your gardening. You want to look for crop seed varieties that do well in our climate. So when you're online browsing for seeds, or even when you go to the garden nurseries, look for seeds that have good heat tolerance. Look for seed varieties with fungal and disease resistance. Less problems for you in your garden. Choose well-established seedlings. So you don't want to get seedlings that are very tiny and don't have their true layers yet. Get well-established, good-sized seedlings, 3 to 4 inches at least. Apply the first 2 recommendations to your seedling choices as well. Useful tips. Alrighty, so we're going to talk about square foot gardening here. All square foot gardening is, if you look at the picture to the right, you'll see in this mini raised bed, there are squares, and each one of those squares are 1 foot on either side, right? And what this allows is it takes away the complexity from getting your plant spacing right. You don't want your garden to be overcrowded. You put too many plants in, they suffocate each other, many of them die off, and none of them grow very well. Plants grown in square foot gardens usually do well compared to plants grown in compact garden rows. Soil prep considerations. Always take into consideration what you intend to plant. Carrots grow best in very loose, deep soil. So that's just an example. Think about that. Utilize every square inch of space. At our farm, that is exactly what we do. We have garden beds, we have a shade house, we have containers, but we also plant along the fence lines in the corners. You can see zucchinis growing, cucumbers, whatever. The whole point is grow food. The most important thing, at least to me, that I think you should take away from this presentation, get your children involved. Get them involved, especially if they're very young. So in this picture to the right here, the 2 top pictures are my kids. That's Zari, Amara, and Ane inside the shade house harvesting tomatoes. At the bottom is Aaron and Isaiah. Those are Carlene's grandchildren. And they love it. They love it. And I think it's just very important because this is how you will help to create food security, because as it stands right now, the youth in our country simply, a lot of them aren't interested in farming. right? And it's because they weren't exposed to it. And one way that we can overcome that is exactly what you see in the picture. Expose them from young. That is my short intro to backyard farming. So you can see our website information at the bottom of the page. You can see where it says our email address and a phone contact. Feel free to reach out to us. Alrighty, so I'll now check the chat to see any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you so much, Germaine. I will direct those questions to you. And thank you so much. And we will definitely get our children, grandchildren involved to grow food, okay, because it's vital and it's needed. And of course, another take home for me is to keep it organic. Keep it organic. So, Germaine, the first question that I have for you, whenever I sow seeds, they grow very skinny and nothing. What am I doing wrong? Germaine?
Sorry, mic was off. Alrighty, yeah, so right there, it pretty much sounds like you probably have a fertilization issue in your garden. When you say skinny, usually what I get from that is you're probably getting what I call, what's referred to as leggy plants. This can also be caused by a lack of light. So you may want to consider where they're planted. It may be too shaded. And what's happening is the plants are reaching out. So those are two things to keep in mind when you're seeing results like that.
Okay. Okay, here's another question. Are you planting your stuff in containers or in the ground? I think you answered that earlier. Are you starting doors? Should you start?
We're planting them in every option that you saw. So we have raised beds, in-ground beds. We literally just dumped a bunch of soil along the fence line. We have stuff growing in there. We also have them planted in containers, and we also have a self-watering system in our shade house that we are currently growing tomatoes and zucchini. So we're planting in all options.
Okay, wonderful. I know you spoke about some commercial pesticides. Are there any homemade pesticides that we can use? Stuff that we can make from scratch?
Well, most definitely, most definitely. And so, for example, the thing is, even water can be considered a pesticide. What I mean by that is one way to treat, let's say, aphids, for example. If the infestation hasn't become heavy as yet, you can literally take a bottle of water and just spray it there and knock them right off the leaves and they'll die. But yes, there are concoctions that you can pull together yourself. You can use a bit of baking soda, some cooking oil. You can add some garlic to it, and you can literally shake that up, spray it on your plants, and that can act as a preventative pesticide. Something like that. What that will do is it will coat your leaves. So let's say you have some bugs on there, it'll pretty much suffocate them. Now the issue with that is they usually don't last very long, right? So you have to apply them more frequent. Another option that you have is marigolds, plants that you can plant within your garden to help fight against pests. An example of that, like I said, just marigolds. You can also use herbs. Herbs do very well. So things like rosemary, things with strong aromas, rosemary, thyme, mint. They do very well in warding off pests in your garden.
Is there such thing as over fertilizing with organic fertilizer? Can you over fertilize with organic stuff?
Yes, definitely you can. Like I said during the presentation, too much of anything can be detrimental. As a human, if you drink too much water, you can die.
Yes.
So yeah, you definitely want to follow instructions. Now, the beauty with using organic fertilizers is the risk of actually over fertilizing is much lower than if you use synthetic fertilizers. But let me give you an example. So we covered blood meal as an organic fertilizer. Um, you can add too much of it, and what it will do is it'll add way too much nitrogen to the soil, which would then, instead of resulting in you getting some nice, beautiful green leaves on your lettuces and your basils and your kales and stuff like that, you end up with a burnt up plant. Of course, you would have to use quite a large amount of it, but always be careful. Read the instructions on the products.
Neem trees are very common in my area. How how can I produce homemade neem pesticide? Would you recommend tires for container gardening? So that's two questions. Would you recommend tires for gardening, and also pesticide from the neem plant?
Definitely, neem is an excellent organic pesticide. In terms of making it yourself, I personally have not ever made it myself, but I'm sure that you can. A better source for answering this question, like I stated during the presentation, we have a local supplier of neem cake in the form of Abaco neem. I would suggest looking them up, give them a call. I'm sure they'll be, Daphne, those over there, Daphne and Nick, they're very open and they'll be more than happy to answer that question for you, I'm sure, as well as you could also support them by purchasing their neem cake product, which actually serves multiple purposes that I'm sure they'll be happy to elaborate on. Now, in terms of using tires as containers, definitely you can use tires. Tires have been used. Let's see. So something that we're going to do very shortly here on the farm is use some tires to grow potatoes. You can make a potato stack out of tires and grow potatoes. Yeah.
You shared a lot of knowledge, information and knowledge with us. One of the persons is asking, how long have you been doing this? How long have you been into gardening?
Well, my answer may surprise you.
Uh-huh.
1 year. Now, here's the thing. Before entering the agricultural industry and becoming a farmer, I actually worked as a cybersecurity analyst. Almost the same applies for Carlene. She operated a school for Charlotte Academy. But we are Adventists, and we always, one of the things that you learn in the Adventist church and the faith is that, self-food production is very important. And this was always in the back of my mind. So we came together, we decided, hey, we want to do this. We got some training, very long, hard, labor-intensive training to learn how to do it over the course of about 3 to 4 months. We had someone come in and we then established Grow Life Supplies. So yeah, it really didn't take that long, but it was a lot of work and a lot of investment.
It's worth it. You guys are doing an excellent, excellent job. What is a realistic time frame to have a healthy looking garden that produces edible? Another question.
You can have a beautiful garden from the start, and the important thing is to realize if you're not sure, you don't have to do it on your own. You can get help. A lot of our clients, well, they hire us. We go in and we get it right from the get-go. Get it right the first time, as well as we provide you with knowledge to keep it going. In terms of the garden looking lush after all your seeds and seedlings are planted, depending on what was planted, 1 month. 4
And-
weeks, you can have a beautiful looking garden.
Okay, that's encouraging. Okay, one of our participants, Pauline Ramming, is saying Hog daughter loves gardening. Loves gardening.
Excellent.
Information has
Great.
been very, very informative. Um, someone is asking how to get rid of cats in their garden.
That's actually a good question, and we've had that before. Now,
Okay.
well, there's two ways. You can kill it. I don't suggest doing that. Don't be cruel to animals. Next option, utilize a natural method. So you can use catnip, right? You know, growing up, you see in the cartoons, they throw a ball of yarn in, which is what they say catnip is on, and the cats go crazy, right? A catnip is actually a plant that you can purchase and plant. And so what you can do is you can plant it in an area of your yard that you don't mind the cats going to, or even on the outside of your yard, that you don't mind the cats going to, and they would be more drawn to that area rather than going in your garden and messing stuff up, pooping in your beds, which is what we had an issue with when we first started out.
Right.
But cats are beneficial to the garden because they, if it's a good cat, if it's a fat, lazy cat, then well, nothing happening. But if it's a good cat, he'll kill things like rats and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. All righty. Someone's asking, what's the size of your farm? How much acres?
The answer to this will surprise you as well. We do urban farming, so we don't even have an acre. We don't even farm on half of an acre. We farm on exactly 10,000 square feet, a quarter of an acre. And I like to highlight that because usually when people think about farming, especially if you're farming for profit, people think that you need a very large amount of space. They think acreage, they think you need, oh, I need at least 2 acres. No, you don't. No, you don't. You can have a small space, and if it's done correctly, and this is where training comes in, and that is what we underwent in order to be able to do this. So although we have a relatively small farm, we produce a lot.
Yes.
And this is all we do. We farm.
Yes. Best job ever. Okay, I have planted pumpkin, cantaloupe, and tomatoes. The pumpkin and cantaloupe shows the flower, but the plant itself is still growing. The tomato trees are not showing any fruits. What's going on with that?
All right, so that's probably a fertilization issue as well. More than likely, you may not have good soil and also not good fertilization. So remember we spoke about these. So you want to use some good garden soil if you're doing it in containers, some good potting mix. And then what you want to do now is I'd recommend going into one of the garden stores, or you can even come to us. We do supply it and we sell it as a blend to supply all of the needs of your crops. You're probably lacking phosphorus, things like phosphorus, calcium, and stuff like that. If your tomato plants aren't putting out anything at all in terms of fruit, either it's just not time for them to put out the fruit, or they just don't have the nutrition needed in order to fruit. Yeah.
Okay.
Same thing applies to your cantaloupes, your melons, stuff like that.
Okay, someone is saying they was told by a friend began considering winter crops like cabbage, lettuce, kale, spinach, etc. But they've already planted this already. Was it too early to plant stuff like that?
When intercropping, you do want to plant everything around the same time. I don't have a visual layout of his garden, so I don't know how tight things are. But if they aren't too tight, you can still intercrop certain plants. So yeah, that's something that can definitely be beneficial to your garden. Intercropping is an excellent way to actually fight against pests. So let me give you a simple example. Intercropping herbs into your leafy greens bed and stuff like that. they will help to ward off pests away from that bed. It acts as a repellent.
Okay. Cucumbers. Saying they plant cucumbers, they flower, but no, it doesn't bear any fruit. What's happening there?
Okay, so we've seen this in some clients' gardens before. One of the reasons is sometimes the cucumber plant doesn't have enough space to spread out. They like to climb, right? They can grow on the ground, but it's better if you let them climb on a fence line or a trellis or something like that. So at our farm right now, you would see some 5-foot trellises, and the cucumber plants actually can get taller. And those are loaded down with cucumbers. Also, we also use the fence line, and we have cucumbers crawling up the fence lines and all over the fence. They need space. So if you have them overcrowded or they just don't have enough space to spread out, that can be the result. Also, fertilization again, and soil quality. All of these are factors into that play a role in the type of production you'll see from your garden.
Okay. Someone is saying, wonderful, wonderful presentation with lots of helpful information. Will this presentation be available to participants via email? They need your contact information also. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. We can send a copy. I'll probably send it to you, Ms. LaCour, and then you can send it out from there.
Okay. What's next? Is it necessary to compost barrel? Is it necessary to have a compost barrel?
No, when she said when they're saying barrel, did you finish the question? Sorry for interrupting you.
Okay. Is it necessary to have a compost barrel? Also, in doing so, I noticed the soil smell very, very bad. How do you use the compost when it smells bad?
Okay, well, let's see now. Okay, so let me address the first question there. In terms of the barrel, I'm assuming you're referring to the compost tumblers, or maybe you're just using the barrel to dump compost in. So let's say if it's a tumbler is not necessary, but it is highly recommended simply because it makes your composting efforts a lot easier. Reduces the labor. It's easier on your back because you don't have to go and grab a pitchfork and turn the compost and stuff like that. And if you're using the barrel to say just dump compost in, which you want to, and this could be the reason why your compost has a scent as well. If you're dumping your compost inputs and stuff in the barrel, more than likely they're not getting adequate access to air, oxygen, and stuff like that. So you probably want to drill some holes in that barrel so air can get in. The other issue with doing it that way is it may be quite hard, especially if the barrel is full, for you to turn. It may even be impossible for you to turn the compost. So if what I'm envisioning in my mind is correct, I don't suggest doing it that way. Get some pallets, go on YouTube, look up compost pallet systems, and do it that way. Air will get inside, it'll be easier for you to turn, or go the way that we recommend, use a tumbler.
Okay.
And in terms of its stinking, like I said before, if your compost stinks, you're doing it wrong. Okay. If it's too wet, you're doing it wrong. If it's too dry, you're doing it wrong.
I was definitely doing it wrong. Okay. Question. This person is just confirming that you said it's okay to plant in the sunny area in the summertime. Don't go for the shady area, even though it's summer. It's best to keep everything in the sun.
There are,
seeds,
let me clarify that.
Seeds, actually. They're talking about seeds.
Seeds.
Are you saying plant the seeds in the sunny area, even in the summertime?
No. let me address that. What I would suggest is getting some seedling trays. You can start your seeds in the shade, and you can even start seeds inside under lights and stuff like that. So if you go to our Instagram page, you'll see an example of that. Quite a few examples actually. You can start them inside. You can start them outside. You don't want them to be in direct sunlight because the sun will more than likely kill kill off the new seedlings once they've germinated. When I talk about the sunlight, I'm talking about what's called hardening them off. So eventually you do want to move the seedlings outside so that they can grow inside your garden. But of course, at that stage, they would have already been more established plants.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers that a bit better.
Right. Okay.
Now, that also kind of answers what I was speculating when this question, when the question was first brought up earlier. So I'm assuming you probably started your seeds in a very shady area or inside, and then the plants got tall and skinny. That's because they were fighting for light. You didn't get them out into the light soon enough. And it doesn't have to be, I wouldn't say put them out in direct sunlight right away. Partial sunlight is fine, but they do need adequate light in order to grow and establish properly.
Okay. The presentation will be available on the conference's website and also YouTube channel. And based on what I'm seeing, we would have covered. Okay, a participant is asking if they can visit your farm.
Yeah, sure. We are located, I'm not sure, number 84 Infant View Road West in Chippingham, same area as the Humane Society. If you need directions, just call and we'll be happy to guide you here.
Okay.
Now, at the farm right now, we're not growing heavily. We're running what we call our summer trials right now, so you will see things as like some broccolis and cauliflowers, cucumbers, and stuff like that. But the farm is not fully fleshed out simply because we're running our trials.
Okay. We do have more questions, so we'll run through these as quick as possible. Do you provide training such as the 3 months that you would have done, or is there a local person that does this?
The person that trained us, he no longer does it, but yes, we do. We do provide training, so it depends on what type of training you're looking for. You may be looking for basic training just to get you up and going with your own little garden in your yard. We also offer classes. We haven't offered them recently simply because of restrictions with COVID and stuff like that. But if you're looking to say start a urban farming business such as ours, we also do offer consultancy and training services for that as well. Yes.
Okay. And our last question, I think you answered this already. They're asking about the compost. They're saying that they never turned it in the barrel and it turned to liquid. So of course, based on what you said, that is no good.
Yes, that liquid is a leachate that has been formed because of the lack of turning and the lack of oxygen supply within your compost. Definitely, you have to turn it. You want to make it easier, I'll say it again, compost tumbler.
Yes. Okay, that brings us to the end of the questions. And we would like to say a special thank you, Germaine Turnquest, for this invaluable information. I know I learned a whole lot. I think I need to come and sit at your feet for some further training so that we can produce some crop and not just have things growing and nothing coming out. So thank you so much. And a lot of persons in the chat expressed their appreciation for your presentation this evening. Thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yes. We'd also like to thank the Ms. Laverne Sturrock, Mr. Bruce Young for the exercise session, Mr. Noel Brown for the devotion, also Renee Johnson, who gave her testimonial. I think that was it so far. Thank you all so much for your participation, and of course to you, 8 weeks participants, and also our guests from the community. Coming right now with our closing, Mr. Noel Brown. But just before he comes, I would like to remind all of you that next week at 6 p.m. will be our commencement exercise for 8 Weeks to Wellness 2020. So please tell someone about it, especially some of the participants that I have not seen last week or this week. Thank you so much for coming again. Noel, do we have the closing prayer, please?
All right, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for life, health, and strength. Praise you for being God, Christ our Savior, the Holy Spirit our Comforter. And we thank you for this wealth of information, especially from the gardening presentation. We ask that we apply it. We definitely live in a time when we need to be responsible for our own homes, our own families, growing our own food. So strengthen us, keep us. Be with the remainder of the program with 8 Weeks to Wellness. Be with us this day and be with us right up to the graduation. Bless us, keep us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.